Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to AAC Talks, the Spring 2019 Web Conference on Augmentative and Alternative Communication. We at Patton are so pleased to welcome you to our first online conference, AAC Talks. My name is Susan Gill, and I'm joined today by Tammy Thompson-Cook, my fellow AT consultant, and we will be facilitating our lineup of terrific sessions today. All of the information that you may need to answer your questions, you're going to find on our AAC Talks conference webpage on the Patton website. So if you want to pause for a moment and copy down this shortened URL, bit.ly/AAC Talks, it's probably going to come in become a useful tool for you during the day today. Okay, before we begin, I'm going to remind you of a few things that you need to know about our conference. I'd like to remind you that all of you in attendance are in listen-only mode, but you do have access to a Q&A feature in your Zoom screen. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout all of the sessions, and we'll share questions with the presenters as time allows. This session, as well as all of the sessions today, are being recorded, and we do hope to make them available to people in the near future on the Patton website. At the end of a live session, a code for continuing education verification is going to be provided. More information about continuing ed credits can be found on the conference page on the Patton website, including an email address for you to use if you experience any technical difficulties during the live webinar. I'll remind you that the conference is being offered for Act 48 credit or for a certificate of attendance. And each of you need to be logging in individually and completing a session verification survey at the end of the day if you're participating for that type of credit. There may be some of you who are sharing a login today, and the credit can only be supplied to the person who has actually logged in. At the end of the day today, a survey link will be posted on the Patton conference page. Again, that link is shown here. You might want to copy it at the bottom of this page. It'll be posted by about 3 o'clock today. And the surveys must be completed by Friday, May 17th at 4 p.m. for people who want to get that continuing education credit from participating today. All of the handouts for the entire day that have been provided to us will be posted. I think at this moment in the morning, there may be one that is not yet posted, but by the time that session comes around this afternoon, we know that it's going to be there if you're curious about that. So again, we welcome your questions during the day, and we're going to move on to talk about our first session today. So welcome to Patton's AAC Spring Talks. Welcome to Patton's AAC Talks Spring 2019 online web conference. You've joined our keynote session entitled Power Through Partnership, Lessons Learned in AAC Team Leadership. As we kick off our AAC web conference, we'd like to point out that the field of AAC may be viewed in the domain of speech-language pathologists, but the practice of AAC belongs to teachers, related services personnel such as occupational therapists, paraprofessionals, and especially to families and AAC users. I have a favorite quote that comes to mind when I think about the kind of partnership that it takes for AAC to be successful. I got this quote from an educational leadership speaker by the name of Tony Wagner, and he says that in talking at one point with the director of talent at Google, she told him, if there's one thing that educators need to understand, it's that you can neither understand nor solve problems within the context and bright lines of subject content. I think that speaks to the the various disciplines that come together to be partners in AAC, and makes this topic so perfect for us as we kick off our conference. Our keynote this morning is the perfect kickoff because it dives right into these issues of partnership. Our keynote speaker, Dana Nieder, who I'm so pleased to have here with us today, embodies that partnership in her roles of parent, teacher, speech-language pathologist, and I know of her from her blog, Uncommon Sense, and through that blog, she demonstrates her commitment to blurring these bright lines and to her feelings of an obligation to lead by sharing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dana Nieder, who will tell you more about herself and begin our webinar.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Susan said, my name is Dana Nieder, and I'm really excited to speak today about the partnership between families, speech professionals, and teachers and other school professionals, and how we can all work together to best support AAC users. So before I introduce myself more, this is my family, and featured prominently is my daughter, Maya. She is now almost 11 years old. She has a very rare genetic syndrome called MED13L, and she is autistic. And when I started my pregnancy with Maya, I started a little family blog to keep everyone updated on the pregnancy. But as life with Maya evolved, the blog did too. Maya started receiving services for speech and feeding when she was 10 months old, but she didn't make much progress in the way of speech or communication. It wasn't until about 8 months later that I first learned about AAC when it came up during a parent support group meeting. And I was very interested in these alternative ways of communicating, and also a little confused why I hadn't heard about it previously, since we had been in the world of therapy for a while. As I prioritized AAC in our life, I wrote more about AAC online, and I also switched careers. I had been a teacher, and I put that on hold to stay home with Maya and coordinate her services and care. And I decided to return to school to get a master's degree in speech language pathology. So this is my first year. I'm a CF, working in a middle school that is a specialized middle school for students with disabilities. And so now I've gotten experience leading an AAC team as a parent leader, and now I'm having experience leading some teams as a speech pathologist leader. Here you can see on the screen that when Maya was little, I was kind of fumbling, but we tried a lot of different things to support her communication. So as somebody who's existed at each vertex of this triangle, I've gotten to hear from members of each community, from AAC families, from speech professionals. I think I mentioned, but prior to staying home with Maya, I was a middle school teacher for 9 years. So I was also an educator. And I've heard some unique experiences, the types of triumphs and frustrations that live in each corner of the triangle. So here today, I'm hoping to share some insights, the perspectives in each group, to help foster understanding and enthusiasm for how we can all partner as stronger teams to support AAC users. Obviously, the AAC user is in the middle of the triangle. They're the most important person, and the priority and focus of each corner needs to be on the user. But secondary to the AAC user, we need to be welcoming and empowering families to take on a leadership role, because as speech professionals and teachers are transient in the lives of the children, but it's the families who will be the lifelong driving force. And it's important that we are educating them so that they can take over as leaders as they move through the world of education and then independent living with their AAC using family members. From each corner of the triangle, I've heard great things said about the other corners. I've heard families who love their speech pathologists and speech pathologists who speak so positively about the leadership and hard work and dedication of their families. But I've also heard some of the opposite. I've heard frustrations from speech professionals about families who aren't involved or families who are too involved. I've heard frustrations from families who feel like they aren't welcomed into the process of making decisions for their child. And a lot of times the teachers are kind of, if the families and speech professionals are going back and forth to try to figure things out, the teachers have to be supported as well because they do spend the bulk of the school day with their students. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about who we have here today so that as I'm moving through the slides, I can kind of tailor my focus. Can we see the results of that survey?
Poll's open now, so anybody can respond.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. We're already 50% of the way there. We'll give it another 5 seconds or so, and we'll launch it up.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Okay, this is great. So I do have information. I see that we have 0% here as parent or family member, but there are some others. So if I was in the room, I would probably pick other to describe myself since I fit across more than one zone. I have information on the slides for specifically for parents who are trying to serve as a leader and educate professionals. And I'm still going to touch on those points because I think that they're important. And they also speak to what it feels like as a parent leader trying to share input. But I'll certainly make sure to focus a bit more heavily on the professional leaders. So I want to talk a little bit about the strengths and challenges faced by the groups at each corner of that triangle, starting with speech pathologists. Now, since there's so many speech professionals there, this is going to be a little pat on the back for us for a minute. Speech pathologists obviously have a great deal of strengths that are critical to providing support for AAC users. They have knowledge about language acquisition and the scope of language, areas of communication. They have specific skill sets that include the ability to collect and analyze data and to plan for therapy activities to elicit specific language targets and to kind of see the scope of language across the lifespan. Now, they look like strengths, especially to many professionals. Being data-driven can be a great thing. It's important to collect data so that you know what you're working on and where you're going next. However, data with students who use AAC or who have complex communication needs is a very tricky thing. When Maya had her first AAC evaluation conducted, the therapist introduced, I think it was a puzzle that had some animals on it. And she had the pieces and a small board with some animal names on it and said, okay, Maya, do you want the cow, the sheep, or the pig? And Maya pushed the button that said zebra. And she did it with a pretty straight face. At the time she was 3, a little over 3. And I was in the room and I could tell it was a joke because I know Maya and she hit zebra many times, zebra, zebra, zebra. But to the SLP conducting the evaluation, that's not a good data point. It's difficult to tell that a child might be joking. It was a reasonable assumption that she didn't understand the question or that she just pushed whichever button looked interesting to her. Even after a student has a robust AAC system, data collection on language of children who use AAC can be complicated. Another story that I tell often about Maya was that this was years after she had her system. She was in a therapy session, and the therapist said, "What did you do today at school?" And Maya's very, very distracted seeming. She's the type of student who goes under the table during the sessions, who runs and turns off the light switch. She can be a bit of a handful. But this day she was looking all around the room, seeming to not pay attention. And she looked up at the fire alarm and typed FIRE, seemingly spelling the word on the fire alarm and ignoring the question. However, on the car ride to therapy, she had told me that there was a fire drill that day. So I knew that she had gone outside and she actually was responding to the question about school that day. The therapist thought that she was just distracted and kind of was like, okay, let's move on and start the session because you're not going to respond to my questions. So being data-driven is a great thing, with the caveat that children with complex communication needs communicate in a lot of interesting ways that don't always line up with easy data collection. Being experienced also seems like a great thing, but these are two of my favorite the dangers of experience quotes that float around on the internet. The most dangerous phrase is, "We've always done it this way." And another quote from Sean Mosen about doing something for 25 years. Sometimes newer professionals who are more open to listening to everyone and less likely to feel like they've seen the similar cases and they know what to do, sometimes are a little bit better at leading. Okay. Oh, did I skip? Oh, there we go. Sorry. So let's talk next about teachers. Teachers also have a unique set of strengths. They know the classroom and the ins and outs of the day better than anyone. They know which units are coming up next and which vocabulary might be worthwhile to have on a device or system. Coordinating with them about things like that is invaluable. I've spent a lot of time this year walking into classrooms and then realizing I need to quickly add 5 or 6 words to a device because it's going to make participating in the lesson that day more meaningful. They also know a lot about classroom culture. Maybe there are little songs that are sung every day. Maybe when the class is excited about something, they all do jazz hands. There's little things that happen during the day that a teacher will just know as background knowledge. They also many teachers have great relationships with their students. Maya would much rather hang out with her teacher than with me. And they know kind of the subconscious expertise of a teacher is which children get along, who might be bickering with who, the inside jokes, the TV shows people are talking about. We need to help them because teachers have a lot on their plates, particularly if they've never worked with an AAC user before, or on the opposite end, if they have multiple AAC users in their classroom, AAC can be overwhelming. And we want them to see AAC as like an exciting, interesting, unique, fun thing that they can use to communicate with a child who might otherwise be challenging for them to interact with. We want them to see it kind of as like an exciting tool. We want them to want it, not for it to be another thing that they have to do during the day. And families. So I'm going to spend a little extra time on this, knowing that we have so many professionals and not many families in the audience. Families' expertise is unparalleled. Right off the bat, a family knows so many little things about their child that can be difficult for a professional to find out about a child who has minimal communication. So right away, with my students this year, I wanted to know everything about what they did after school, what their favorite foods are, what they don't like, which videos they watched on YouTube over and over again, which video parts they rewind to a lot and which parts they skip. I want to know what their weekends look like, what their hobbies are. I had a student this year who, it turns out, would the grandmother in the house watch Golden Girls, and he would sit and watch Golden Girls next to his grandma. That came up in a conversation with his mom, and he had been kind of a difficult student for me to connect with. And the next time I was sitting next to him, I just started to hum the Golden Girls theme, and it really was a nice little turning point for us. Families just know this stuff. And we have to do our best to kind of get as many little pieces as we can, because all of that is going to play into not only motivating a student to connect and want to interact with us, but also it will lead to kind of specific vocabulary stuff that we'll get to later. Parents know, and this one's a little tricky, they're the best communication partners for their non-speaking children. And I want to make sure that I'm clear, that doesn't mean that they know everything. No one can predict what another person is thinking. But one thing that I know is I know when I'm getting it wrong with Maya as well. If she's trying to say something and I'm having difficulty understanding, and I guess at what she's saying, I can tell just by the way her eyes move whether I got it right or not. If I have it right, she's more likely to make a specific type of eye contact. If I have it wrong, she's more likely to kind of look away or maybe move her body differently. And those signals are just intrinsic things that I know about how she communicates. They also know down at the bottom, they offer the most meaningful opportunity for generalization because they are there long-term. And at the bottom, they have this subconscious knowledge about what their child reacts to, both in terms of sensory, but also in terms of concepts. These two pictures of scissors that I have on this slide are because the scissor on the left with the blue handle is the more common looking pair of scissors, are the type of scissors that appear on any sort of assessment of knowledge or vocabulary. The type of scissors on the right, the loop scissors, are the only scissors Maya had ever seen prior to going to preschool. And so that sort of knowledge too, just knowing kind of what a student knows and what a student doesn't know, what their life experience have exposed them to, because a student might not get scissors correct on an assessment because they've never had an experience in knowing that that thing on the left is actually a pair of scissors. In talking about challenges for families, we have two types of families that I've heard spoken about. One is the uninvolved family, and the other is the overinvolved family. And I've been both of those families before. So let's take a look first at the reasons that a family might seem resistant to AAC. We've got a lot of stuff on this slide. And I guess I should say that about a lot of the slides that are coming up. I also can kind of tend to dump links and information in, kind of a choose your own adventure presentation for later. There's a lot of stuff to read, just because I think it's important to share as much as I can and that each person would take different things away from here. But you might recognize some things from some of the families that you've worked with before. This is kind of a deep dive because I hear a lot of, mom says she doesn't want a device, but there's a whole rainbow of reasons for why that might be the case. And forming a relationship with families in which you can kind of unpack some of those reasons can lead to families becoming very enthusiastic about using AAC. So in the first column here, the orange column, many families have been provided with misinformation, including from previous professionals they've worked with. They might think that AAC will have a negative impact on speech, or that there are certain prerequisite skills that have to be mastered before AAC can be used. They might think that you have to move through a specific hierarchy of low tech to high tech AAC, or from say pictures of concrete objects to more abstract images. They might have a lack of AAC knowledge or think that AAC is only picture cards. These are all very real concerns, particularly if they've heard it from another professional before. Leads directly to the second column, which is that there are so many professionals in the lives of families who have children with disabilities. Lots of them are suggesting many different things. We heard from a physical therapist who really was insistent that we installed like a ballet dancing bar in the hallway, and really thought that if we got that item, Maya would be able to start walking. I think I put a link in the note sections of this slide to a post about that. But there's a lot of conflicting advice, and it's difficult to figure out what the priority needs to be. There's also some families who have felt before like professionals aren't really listening to them. That people come in and say, here's this thing that would really benefit your child, let's start doing it, without hearing their concerns or really even ensuring that they understand what's being discussed. After a device is provided, there can be a lack of outreach and training that leads to a parent feeling confused about a device and really just like not really wanting to see it or be reminded that it's there because they feel like they don't know what to do with it. In the green column, there's a lot of stuff on the plate of families of children with complex communication needs, especially if they also have medical issues, which often are co-occurring. The other advocacy mentioned, when I created the slide, families wanted me to make sure to mention all of the different areas of advocacy that have to happen besides speech. So for me personally, when I decided that communication was what my family was really going to focus on, we let a lot of the other stuff go. When we had bus problems, a lot of times I would just drive Maya to school because I couldn't do everything at once. For students that have more medical issues or accessibility issues in their general life, or are trying to deal with family members who might not be supportive, there's just so much that happens that if a family is not going to take the lead on AAC, they might really benefit from a good amount of support from an SLP, which can be difficult if you're a school-based SLP. The blue column is one of my favorite things to discuss with families. The ability to predict what your child is saying is kind of a natural phase of parenting. It happens with all typically developing babies and toddlers. Babies and toddlers get upset, they cry, a parent says, do you want the grapes? Do you want the cookie? Do you want the, and then they kind of guess and predict, give their child the object and feel like they've predicted successfully. They build on that and kind of file it away so that the next time the same event happens, they remember the solutions. When you have a child that doesn't learn to speak according to a normal timeline, this phase gets prolonged way past where it should. For families of students who are not communicating verbally, they might have a similar interaction where a child points at a box of cookies high up on a cabinet. Now, if the parent gives the child the cookie and the child takes the cookie and eats it, the parent might feel like they have closed that communication circle. There was a request by pointing, they provided the object and gave them the cookie, the child took the cookie and ate it, and everyone was happy. But in reality, without having a means to communicate other thoughts about the cookie, the parent doesn't know if the student was trying to say something like, the person next to me at lunch always brings those cookies. Or, my teacher was eating those cookies today and sneezed and spit them on the floor. Or a million other things that could be said about those cookies. But if you give a child a cookie, it sounds like I'm doing the storybook now. If you give a child a cookie, they will probably take it and eat it. And that end of the loop will feel like it was complete to the parent, but it won't be. And so an important part of working with families is to kind of illuminate that those gaps, the fact that there could be so many other things that a child is trying to initiate with a point rather than just a request. And we'll talk a little bit about that on another slide. And the last column is the belief that their child is unable to use AAC. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of families of children with complex communication needs, they've had the experience of seeing many, many doctors and therapists. For us, by the time Maya was 2.5, we had seen 13 doctors, 7 therapists, 4 of whom were speech language pathologists, had 4 hospital visits, and the doctors included 2 geneticists, a neurologist, and a developmental pediatrician. And not a single one of them mentioned AAC to us. And so families who are first learning about AAC might also experience some confusion of, I don't think this is something that could work for us, because surely somebody would have told us about it before now. There's a range of other features listed at the bottom of the slide, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Excuse me. Overinvolved families. So this is kind of a complaint that I'm hearing more and more frequently, I guess, as the iPad has become so available and so commonplace, and families have access to technology and the ability for some families who have the means, or for families who are able to use some sort of crowdfunding or other funds to access the technology and purchase it themselves. Some speech professionals particularly will voice their concerns or complaints that families will, quote, just purchase an app without really knowing what they're doing or without doing proper research. One thing that I want to mention on this is to consider the source of those decisions. So if a family is deciding to purchase something on their own without working with a professional, it is likely because prior to this purchase, they've either been underserved or misserved by professionals. Maybe they were told that their child wasn't a candidate or had to master prerequisite skills first. Maybe, like my family, they did undergo more than one AAC evaluation and felt that the recommendations made were too limiting. For many families, access to technology is easier than access to professionals who are willing to listen and partner with them, which is a real concern for everyone involved. I was recently introduced to this term disintermediation, which I love, and it's the thing that happens when people can access something directly without going through an intermediary first. So that's what has happened in the field of AAC, because families can now directly access the technology that they previously had to go through an SLP to, say, get a device recommendation written up. And there are negative outcomes of this, such as families who end up with apps that might be less than ideal or ill-fitting or perhaps not robust. But there's also positive outcomes, which are that more people are able to get access to AAC that perhaps couldn't otherwise, either because they found themselves working with somebody who was a gatekeeper who wasn't saying that they were ready to access the technology, or because they might just be in a place, in many areas of the country, there are not a wealth of professionals who are confident with their AAC knowledge, who are recommending it early and helping families get out there. So we were definitely an over-involved family, and this speaks to the concept of role release, which is that when SLPs or other professionals kind of release aspects of their roles to share the work as a team rather than keeping that domain to themselves. But when Maya was 4, we had a new home SLP who came to work with her. And by that time, Maya had used her device for almost a year. And this new speech pathologist watched me model, and I explained to her how we use the device and how it worked and how Maya commonly used it and what I thought was important for us to work on next. And Maya refused to touch her device when the speech pathologist was here. Like 100% refused, wouldn't do it. And this went on twice a week for the first 2 weeks, for the first month, for the month and a half. And it took 4 months before she touched the device in front of her therapist. Now, I will say there had been other sessions where when the therapist left, she would be in the hallway and would like linger with the door open for a minute because Maya would start right as she was leaving, talking to me with it again. But the speech therapist did voice her concerns and said, you know, Dana, I don't know. I don't know what to do with this. I mean, she doesn't want me to model. She doesn't want to touch it. And luckily I had videos. I was able to listen to her very openly and say, like, let me show you some videos. Let me show you how things are working for us. And we were able to partner around it. But if we hadn't established that trust, the role release for our therapist would have been difficult because I did kind of seem like maybe I was a parent who was really overestimating her child, since there was no evidence of it during the sessions. So this is kind of a summary table of everything that we've talked about so far with the different perspectives and strengths and weaknesses of all the groups. And I'd like to pause here for a second to see how we're doing with questions and if there's anything, Susan, that you think would be good to address before I keep going.
We don't have any questions coming in regarding what you've talked about so far. So I'm just going to remind people who are participating live that they can use the Q&A, or there are some people who are using the chat and we will try to respond. There are people who are putting in comments like awesome so far, and I love your examples, and wonderful. So though there isn't a particular question, you have really good feedback at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm trying to grab seconds to get sips of water because allergies here in New York are a little high, but okay, good. I'm glad. I can't see the questions, but I do have another spot after another chunk of information where I'll see if there's anything out there. Okay, so let's talk now about partnering. We've talked about the different vertexes of that triangle from the beginning, and now let's talk about how to kind of connect everyone together with the lines. In thinking about leading a team, I want to emphasize first that anybody can be the leader. We can have parents who are leaders. As I said, I was a parent leader. I still am a parent leader for Maya for many years. She's now almost 11, and I still meet and speak with every new speech pathologist every year and ensure that our goals are aligning for her and that they understand where we've come from and what our priorities are. There are also much more commonly speech language pathologists who are leading the AAC team, who are working often in schools to try to reach out to parents and also to support and motivate teachers and other personnel in the school to use a device. So everyone needs to feel invested, empowered, valued, and supported. And this investment piece, particularly for beginners, is the most challenging part. I really think that investment is a combination of perception and belief. So specifically for AAC, getting somebody invested first means getting them to perceive that there's a need for AAC. Some children use AAC who are partially verbal or who can speak, but their speech isn't really functional communication. Some students use AAC who might seem like they're very young, or that perhaps they might not have some sort of cognitive skills that some people believe might be necessary. We first need to get everyone on board to perceive that AAC can be a powerful tool for the student that we're thinking of. And then we need to get them to believe it can happen. So forget about the possible hurdles that stand in the way or any other hesitations they have. First, you need to perceive that it's important, and then you need to believe that it can work. After that, we need to empower each other and make sure that each member of the team feels like they're capable of doing something. It's not fun to try to do something that you don't feel good at. If people feel like modeling is awkward and they don't know what they're doing and they don't understand it, they're going to try to avoid doing that thing. So we want to build everyone up and make them feel like they can do it. We want to make sure that they feel heard and that we respond meaningfully to concerns and that we're recognizing their attempts at doing anything positive to support this AAC use. And then we want to make them feel supported, like we're there to continue with leading the team in any way we can. When we think about supporting team members, we need to not only think about their role, whether they're a professional or a teacher or a family member, but also their experience so far. So if you look at this picture, we have this little girl in the orange circle, the reddish orange circle, is clearly a beginner in the pool and needs to stay in the area where she has the most support. The person in the yellow circle hasn't grown up with them and maybe some flotation stuff, it's hard to see. So they're kind of an intermediate. They're ready to get out there a little more independently in the water, but they need a partner right with them. And then the person up top in the blue is ready to go. They just need a lifeguard around in case there's a problem. And when we think about supporting members of the team, I think about them kind of the same way. So we have different categories like family members and professionals, but also different levels. We need to think about who needs which type of support. So here's kind of that same drawing, just a little more clear. So with beginners, we want to say to them, I'm going to help and I'm going to teach you how to do this. They're pretty dependent on the team leader. With intermediates, we're going to do it together. It's a place of interdependence, and we want to expand the AAC use and diversify it, generalize it, make sure all the functions are being addressed. And with advanced members of the team, we want them to be going on their own. We want leaders to come out of this process. If you're working with a team who has a lot of AAC experience with an AAC user who's older, who's more independent, we are just kind of a supporting role at that part. We're here to help, but we're releasing that role of leadership. I'm going to spend the most amount of time talking about beginners because that's where the most challenges in leadership and where most of the troubles arise. I also have some slides tucked in at the end of this presentation that talk about challenges, teamwork, this team approach of investing and empowering and supporting and valuing can only go so far. There are sometimes kind of stronger conflicts, and I have some slides tucked in at the end to address those. But we're gonna proceed with the assumption that everyone is coming from a good place. Everyone wants the AAC user and the family and everyone to be successful and independent. And we're just going to talk about how to get everyone invested and move through that path from beginners to advanced. So the most important thing to start with is the investment for beginners. Like I said, that perception and belief. And when we're talking about the necessity of the AAC system, you see this picture of the bus, and it says mind readers. I'm going to skip to the next slide, and then we're going to come back. So here's a bus. If a student points at the bus and says, "Bah," you might assume that they're labeling the bus or saying something like the examples here about a bus. I see a bus, I like the bus is yellow, that bus is big. But similar to the example that I provided before about the cookie, with pointing at a cookie, we need to help our team members see that there are many things that can be communicated by producing just a simple sound and a point. I'm not going to read these all, but here are some other examples of things that could be said about the bus. If we're trying to get a family invested in the need for AAC, one of the most powerful things, but also something that you need to proceed with caution about, is helping them see how important it is that their child can communicate things to them that happen when the parents are not around. So that bold at the bottom, something happened to me on the bus, still, as a parent of a child with complex communication needs, like, makes me tear up a little bit. It is so important that our students have ways to communicate ideas that they wouldn't be able to produce with their simple sounds or signs or gestures or a simple core board. These are important things, and these are things that your families think about at night. On the side here, there's a little excerpt from something that I wrote online, but I wanted to highlight this paragraph right here. The point of this was that I was saying I wondered why Maya was pointing at some leaves. And I said, or did you do an art project at school today with leaves? One that I won't find out about until it comes home weeks from now, faded and with holes from being stapled to a bulletin board when I'm helpless to connect the two. So these sort of examples to share with families, we know, let me rewind. So we know that you have ways of communicating with your children at home, and we value those. We are sure that you have developed amazing ways of understanding your child, but we want to make sure that your child can communicate things to everyone that they can understand that happen when that person's not with the child. If your child rides the bus to school and comes in and they're upset, we want to make sure that they have access to language to tell us if something happened on the ride in. Those are very meaningful examples for families to hear about why it's so important to have access to a large vocabulary and to work on independent communication. You might also need to dispel some false beliefs, like we spoke about before. And let me bring this up. So, like I said, I have some stuff here for parent leaders. Let me focus on the professionals a little bit. One thing that I put in this special box for professional leaders is to be gentle. So be enthusiastic, but understand how many things families have heard by the time you come along. Plant seeds. Share ideas such as, I was thinking about your child, and I think he has so much to say. And I'm wondering if you've ever heard about this before. Don't come in and say, this is what I think your child needs in general. I mean, it wouldn't have worked for me. And I'm a very on board AAC parent, but had I been approached that way by somebody, I think I would have put up some defenses, and it would have taken me a little while to get back to them and start a partnership. Focus on the child, not the system. While you might see a lot of students in the same child's classroom who are using a system with great success, I feel like personally, parents are more likely to be receptive initially if you are saying something like, I can tell that Johnny has so many interesting things to say. I would love to hear what Johnny thinks about the chicks that are hatching in his classroom, and I'm wondering if we could introduce this to see what he thinks of it. Saying that this system works for a lot of my students, especially for families who have heard a lot of times about how their child might be unique or have unique challenges, that might not be the best approach. Parent leaders, I recommend, and I know there aren't many in the audience, but for parents, I recommend that they get some questions about developmental norms, particularly if they feel like a professional is waiting too long to introduce AAC, that they ask questions like, how many words would a typical child, my child's age, have? Or would a typically developing child be asking questions at this point? I also think that it can be really meaningful, and this I put in the parents box, but it's for professionals as well, to share videos of AAC use once the introduction has begun. So if you're trialing a system at school and you have a way to share video clips with families to show the student communicating something they haven't been able to do yet, that can be really meaningful. We're going to skip this one. Okay, so now we're moving beyond investment to empower and value beginning families and beginning team members, whether it's teachers or families. One thing that's empowering is seeing success. So seeing successful AAC users can be really motivating. In the blue box in the middle of this slide, there are some links. The top link is Maya's story from age 2 to 5 and shows her moving from sign language and some signs and sounds to using a communication book, and then to using an app, and then to using a different app than the one that we settled on in the end. And so you can really see her AAC development in about 10 minutes. Felix's video is similar, and the We Speak Pod YouTube channel features a family that has multiple AAC users and shows clips of them modeling and using AAC across many environments in life. So that sort of success can be really motivating. In the notes of this slide, I also have a link to a blog post by a great author, Fiona's mom. And she describes a little bit more about the challenges of the first year, the time that it takes to model before you. It's not a video, so I didn't put it here, but it can also be very meaningful to read to see that it doesn't all happen immediately. Excuse me. In the green box, there are some great videos about modeling. Lauren Enders has an amazing Pinterest board of tons of modeling examples, and I have a shorter compilation of them at that Take a Look Tuesday post. Modeling can be really intimidating. I remember worrying a lot about but if I want to model a verb, should I model the root or should I open tenses? And should I be using articles? And the analysis to paralysis was very strong with me as a mom. I was terrified of doing it wrong. And I imagine that a lot of parents and teachers who don't have AAC exposure or coaching feel the same way. They don't want to mess it up. So seeing videos of people doing it made it much more accessible to me and made me feel empowered to model myself. The last video here, modeling when it's mostly to yourself, was me attempting to model while my children played. I think they were running a store or something. And I think it's also important to see those videos when it feels like, am I even doing this right now? Is anybody looking over at me? It doesn't have to be make or break, and taking that pressure off is very important to support people in feeling empowered because they can't do it wrong. It's important at every phase here to listen and address the concerns of the people that we're focusing on. And support. Let me just put everything up here. So supporting beginners is a lot of, we need to provide them with a tailored vocabulary. I have a bunch of 2 links here, I guess, from Assistiveware and from Practical AAC about core words. The core word classroom organizes words by activity. So there's words of the week, but there's also suggestions for different types of activities and the core words you can use. The AAC implementation link by Heidi Lustraco, it has this great chart where if your child has an interest in Legos, you put that in the middle and it kind of walks you through different core words, like what verbs could you use with Legos, what adjectives, so that you can plan right there on the page for including the core words. I want to make sure that I mention the highly motivating fringe. I think particularly in this professional world, we all know how important and versatile core words are and how meaningful they can be to generalize across environments and to use in a lot of ways. But let's not forget how important highly motivating fringe words are. In the beginning with Maya, we had a lot of nouns, and that was a lot of her early productions. And that makes sense. I mean, I'm with my friend's toddler often now, and a lot of her productions are specific nouns that she wants. The example that I mentioned before about the Golden Girls, we should have a button that says Golden Girls, because if you watch that on TV and it made you look at me when I started to sing the song and you haven't been looking at me prior to that, that is something that matters to you. And you should have the words to say things that matter to you. That is a fundamental important thing. So let's make sure that if we're trying core boards or we're trying a device with a lot of mass vocabulary to get those first core words in, like stop and go, let's all put in a few really specific, exciting things for that student and see if that might get them hooked a little bit more quickly. Other concrete support that beginners need are actual activity ideas. Give them vocabulary or a few phrases that can be targeted at different times of the day. In this box, it says, identify opportunities that already exist. For parent team leaders, that can mean asking to visit the school for a morning to observe things in the classroom. And for speech professionals, same. If you're not pushing in for a session already, try to get in for a push-in and really watch some of the run-of-the-mill activities. If there's transitions that are consistent, if there's certain activities that always happen at different parts of the day, if they do a chant before they line up, being in the environment really helps to see these things. If you're trying to gain information from home, I think home surveys are great. If you get papers back. Sometimes I don't get papers back, but phone calls home, little check-ins. I would have been happy to speak to a speech professional for quite a while to tell them things that happen at home if they explained to me that they wanted to send home some resources or to provide support. There's a link there for that Pool Noodle Robot book, which is just a really simple activity with kind of commonplace items aside from maybe the pool noodle if you don't have one, but it's just an example of how you can plan concretely for vocabulary, which since this audience is speech professionals, you know a lot about that stuff. This is the second slide about support for beginners because they need a lot. And I'm going to try to keep moving here because I don't want to run out of time. Coaching is super important, and I think it often gets overlooked. The ability to check in with people regularly to make sure that you're supporting them, to not kind of drop the device in an introduction and say, okay, you can do this, good luck. To have those meetings where you say, it doesn't have to be a meeting, to, say to the teacher as you're leaving the room, say, how's it going? How's he using it? Is it working? You're having any trouble? To come from that place of sincerity, of assuming that if they can get it to work in their classroom, they will get it to work. And if it's not working right now, there might be something that you can help with, some advice, or maybe they're still uncomfortable. Professionals talking to families, sometimes I recommend that you say one thing that I've seen other families do when you're helping them troubleshoot, because it seems less like a professional who might not really have a meaningful understanding of AAC family life. It seems more like you're trying to help them by sharing another family's story, and a little bit less like you as a professional is telling them what to do. I also put here in the parent leader box, don't dump, trickle, but that definitely applies for professional leaders as well. I don't see the benefit of giving a teacher or a family member a stapled packet of AAC information. I don't think it's going to get read. I don't think it's going to get absorbed. I think it's going to get put to the side and eventually tossed on the floor or stepped on or end up in a pile of papers. So I think trickling these resources through video sharing, through phone calls, through a note home, through a photo, an email, anything that you can do to just keep a steady stream going. Because then when somebody's ready to partner and absorb and get on board, they will know that you're ready too. And it will be in a less overwhelming way. The stuff linked here is just resources that can be used. The PRC implementation classes, if you haven't done them, they're really good. And I sometimes recommend to families that they could do them and could also sponsor a professional. Some of them are only like $15. And if they wanted to watch it together or say let's both do this and then talk about it. Speaking of other AAC families, here is a whole bunch of web resources. Some of them are families, some of them are professionals, some of them are both. I got this from my own blog Facebook page. I said, who are you following? Who should we share? And this is a whole bunch of stuff. If you're not already following AAC families, you really should. It's a super important group to learn from. If you aren't following groups where there are AAC users who are participating, that is super important as well. I cannot overstate how much I value hearing from AAC users, because they are a part of my child's community in a way that I won't be. And that's super, super important to listen to them and to hear their stories and advice. Intermediates, things get easier now. Now we've moved on from the beginners. I was going to pause here for questions, but I'm going to go through intermediates and advanced pretty quickly so that there's a little time at the end. A lot of this is kind of self-explanatory if I don't read everything aloud, which I don't think we need to do for PowerPoint. So I'm just going to hop along here, and then we'll do questions at the end. So supporting intermediates, we already have people invested and on board. And what we need to do now for investment and valuing is to make sure that it doesn't get stagnant. We don't want to have AAC users who are able to make formulaic requests or simple comments, and then we're stuck. We want to think about the communicative functions. We want to think about areas of language. We want to think about communication breakdown and repair. And we want to share with members of the team where we see gaps. So is it that they're not able to engage socially? Is it that they're able to comment and request, but they're not really asking meaningful questions yet? Do we need to work on clauses and expanding utterances? Whatever we need, whatever we see that could be worked on as speech professionals, we need to share that information with others who might feel like, well, you know, they use it pretty good. They can say things. If they see something, they can say something. We want to kind of just widen that lens, to zoom out and make sure that everyone sees where we could be more successful, and to make sure that they are exposed to, there's a lot of great videos on YouTube of adult AAC users who are just like proficient, fluent, independent communicators. And so to see that that's possible and know what's out there. Okay, part of empowerment here is linked at this level. I feel like empowerment is linked to knowing the long-term goals and plans, which is why I've included for a family some links to kind of basic language development stuff like the Linguist Systems Guide and the Brown's levels, and communication competencies, which if you don't know the AAC communication competencies by Janice Light and David McNaughton, linguistic, operational, social, strategic, and there's strategies included with that article. That's important stuff to think about. It takes AAC use from being beyond, 3 to 4 word sentences and more into developing a really independent communicator who can move through a lot of different areas of life more independently. At this level, SLP leaders, it's great to share your goals with families and with teachers, but it's also good to share your goals with a very open mind. Remember at this point that you're not dealing with families who are new to AAC. They've been working on these systems and they might have their own priorities. I personally have asked Maya's SLP to change proposed IEP goals more than once because my priorities were a bit different than their priorities. And luckily they understood that I was coming from a place of sincerity and that I was supporting Maya throughout her life and my priorities should really be honored. If you're looking for something to kind of up the motivation and the investment at this intermediate level, things like modeling challenges, trackers, core word calendars, these can all be really fun ways to motivate and increase AAC usage. I would tread lightly before sending something like this home to families, as it could seem like a big homework project. but for use either between professionals or like in the school in general, these things can be really fun. And supporting experts. We really want to turn everything over to the AAC user at this part. We're hoping that the AAC user has become pretty independent and that the family really feels empowered already to do a lot of stuff on their own. We want to kind of go out looking for trouble to see where we can identify gaps, to ensure that we're out in the community looking for any sort of difficulty we can find. We want to ask questions like, what do you need me to help with? What should we focus on? Ensure that they can get around social media and use additional features, and to form relationships with other AAC networks and communities. I really like charts, so I kind of took the top bar from each page and put them all together here, cohesive. And these slides, these are the ones that I mentioned, they're tacked on at the end. So this is when we hit more trouble, when things aren't working well, when things are breaking down, when you feel like heads are really butting. I think, let me pause here. And if there aren't too many questions, then I'll go through the next ones a little bit more. But if there are more questions, these next ones are pretty self-explanatory. So Susan, how are the questions?
There are a couple. Oops. We have a couple questions. And I'm hearing an echo. So, oh, there we are. So we have a couple questions that might be good to ask right now. There is someone who has is asking as an SLP who is asking about handling working with your child's SLP, and you know, the feeling like the SLP doesn't have the in-depth experience that perhaps that certainly the parent has, and the parent as someone who, an SLP who is, she says, fell in love with AAC early on. That and a couple of other indicators make me think that when things break down is a really great place to spend a few minutes.
Okay.
And I'm just going to throw in one other clarification, a very specific clarification that a parent, it seems that a parent is asking, is that she missed it, but when you had all those Facebook groups and links, and she's asking us, is specifically, did you refer to something that was AAC families that families should follow? So I'm not a parent of an AAC user, and I don't have that. I'm not in a group that's called AAC families. I can't answer that. So maybe you can speak as well to that.
Okay, sure. Let me, I live with actual papers, and so I throw them kind of over my shoulder when I'm done with the slide haphazardly, and I'm not, let me go back to that group one in a minute. Let's look at this one first. Okay. So when things break down, we need to think first about the stuff in the red box and try to think about where everyone is coming from. When we are in a disagreement with another professional or a family kind of versus a professional, for lack of a better word, everyone wants to make sure that their opinion and their information is being heard truly, and that it's not being devalued or tossed aside. Additionally, they don't want to be kind of told to do something that they don't agree with or that they don't feel like they can do. And so we need to kind of come from a place of very good intentions and seek first to understand, to acknowledge the concerns that they have, and to ask about what they need. When I have worked with speech professionals, I have always tried to approach them first to hear what they're saying, but also in this green box of navigating roadblocks, I like to also give people an out. So if a professional, say, had a goal for Maya that I thought was not an appropriate goal. For example, a lot of people like to work on eye contact. Just my personal and professional philosophy, I don't feel like eye contact is really an appropriate goal for a lot of students. And so I approach that rather than saying, I don't believe in eye contact, or, well, I think that that is not a valid thing to work on, or it's inappropriate. I just said, oh, I know that's something that a lot of students work on. I don't feel like it's best for that to be a goal that Maya is going to work on. For AAC use, kind of the same sort of stuff. I think it's important to acknowledge that when people are sharing their advice or their goals, they're coming from a place where they think that they're doing the right thing. And it's important to say, I see that. Also, my goals are different. And I think there are ways that we can disagree. I have here at the bottom that Asha says that it's especially important to incorporate the needs of family members. I believe that somewhere in the same statement, it also says that the person that has the most experience in AAC should be the person that is acting as the team leader, regardless of their domain or background. These slides are primarily for families. Sorry, I went the wrong way, of ways that they can respond if they run into the common roadblocks if somebody's too young, too behavioral for an AAC device. I also have that more academic approach to disagreement, which often goes well with professionals. The AAC Myths Revealed series here at the top has great, simple, easy to understand handouts that are cited with research about different approaches. I find these links to be helpful. And I like asking questions. So especially if somebody's recommending a specific system, if it's on hand, show me how will this device let me say this sentence? Show me how this system is going to grow when they're ready for more words. And this is if all else fails, you can kind of go above or around people. I'm going to hop back if I can. Oh, here it is. So families, let me look and see. On the Facebook pages, family-run pages, Hold My Words is a family-run page. We Speak Pod is a family-run page. Uncommon Sense, that's me, that's a family-run page. Groups, the user groups are great, and it's a mix of families, AAC users, and professionals in each group. And by that, I mean like the Speak for Yourself user group, the LAMP user group. They're device or app specific. Often they include members who use other systems. Let me look here. The AAC Alternative Awesome Communicators, AAC Through Motivate Model Move Out of the Way, and the Angelman page are all heavily populated by AAC families. On Instagram, Lots of Comptons is a family page. We Speak Pod is a family page. Uncommon Sense is a family-run page. And I think that's it. So let me hop back, and okay. So I'm going to end here, and I don't know if there's time for questions, honestly, but I'm going to end here. This is all of my contact information, and I will happily get back to you at any of those places. Twitter is my least used one, but you can get me through any of them. And I'm going to turn it back to you now, Susan.
Thanks, Dana. I think that you handled most of the questions that we had. There are a few things that we put some other resources into the Q&A. Thank you so much. On behalf of Pat and I thank you for opening our AAC Talks web conference so beautifully. I thank everybody for joining us today for our first AAC Talks web conference, and we thank you all for your participation. Before I provide you with the code, I'd like to remind you that the session verification survey will be available on the conference webpage at 3 p.m. today, where you'll enter your codes for Act 48 or certificates of attendance, and that survey has to be completed by May 17th at 4 p.m. Once again, thanks to all for your interest and attention this morning. And we will end the webinar with the code that you will need to keep track of for the day, which is the code for this particular session is 0427. 0427. With that, we'll end our webinar. Thank you so much, all of you, and particularly thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
You too.